Okay, so before we go on to more of our own thoughts on what, CrossFit and all that stuff is, we are going to look at some evidence, because obviously we are an evidence-based podcast, and we are talking about, is it bad for you? So, is it bad for you? So is CrossFit dangerous? Which is still a pretty popular stand for a lot of people. A lot of people do tend to think CrossFit can be dangerous. Maybe not so much in our circle, because obviously a lot of people do CrossFit, and obviously Tom in that sort of evidence-based community. A lot of people in the outside world, maybe people are a bit elitist to their own sort of powerlifting and bodybuilding ways. And we have spoken about data in the past on older episodes, but I'm fully aware that a lot of our new listeners probably haven't listened that far back, and I wouldn't recommend it. It's probably shit. We've grown since then. We're better now. And we have got some new data though. Here's a little recap though, the data we did explore before. So we did have a 2013 paper, and this was actually the first one that looked at CrossFit and injuries. And the problem with this one though, it was a questionnaire based paper, so it's quite low quality. That you're essentially just sort of asking people things, and they're obviously they can be very biased, can't they? So, but what they did was they got 132 responses, and 97 of those sustained an injury during CrossFit training. And in total, there was 186 injuries reported. So obviously, some of them had more than one there. But this is the important thing, okay? Is something we're going to sort of beat on time and time again, and that is the injury rate per 1,000 hours, because this is what we can compare CrossFit to with other sports. And the injury rate, according to this paper, was 3.1 per 1,000 hours. Okay. And when we compared this to other injury rates of other sports, it didn't seem that outrageous. And I actually do have a little table here, Tom, so bear with me, mate. I did take a picture one. Okay, cool. So there we go. I'll give you a sort of a comparison. So when this came out, it was put into like a nice little funky table, which kind of gave you sort of more context of how it looked. So if we looked at strongman, that was calculated at 5.5 per 1,000 hours. Powerlifting, there was a couple on powerlifting. So some were at 4.4, some were at 3.7, but then there was some powerlifting where it was all the way down at 0.84. So there's a big disparity there between results on powerlifting papers and injury per 1,000 hours. Olympic weightlifting was 3.3 and 2.6. CrossFit, as I said, was 3.1. And then bodybuilding was all the way down at 0.24. And I think we spoke about bodybuilders saying it does make sense because it's a very, what's the word? It's very hard to do too much sometimes. It's very static, isn't it?
It's like quite rigorous. It could be. There's so many factors to play into it here that it's hard to just narrow it down to one thing.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, with bodybuilding, obviously, like programming is very rigorous, and also with bodybuilding, like their competition is when they go and pose on the stage. Where we say something like CrossFit, the competition is actually performing that exercise to pretty much RPE 5 billion.
5 billion, is that a new scale?
Do you know what I mean? Like when you're in competition and your competition involves actually doing the exercise, you are going fucking, Bill, full send.
Yeah, love it.
Trademarked.
Send it.
Yeah, you are going full send, so you're going to injure yourself. Whereas if you're on stage and you're posing at an RP of 10,
it doesn't sound very
I don't know
like,
what, you know, apart from passing out due to hunger and fatigue, etc., like injury rates would be low. Also, like a lot of bodybuilding is, don't get me wrong, like bodybuilding, you do get a lot of like barbell movements, etc. But traditional, like professional bodybuilders, etc., a lot of it is like machine based, etc.
Yeah, sure.
Where one of the worst things that could happen is like if it's like a machine, the machine just goes back down. Obviously, that's not taken into account barbells, etc. There are still injuries, just a lot less. But yeah, like these papers were one of the main things that challenged my bias, because years ago I was in the crowd for CrossFit is bad, it's just bad for you. You see all the YouTube videos of people spectacularly failing, etc. Oh, to be fair, you can see that with powerlifting videos online as well. You can see that with how many bodybuilding injuries have come out recently. I mean, look at fucking Larry Wheels. Most fucking injuries at the moment just down to Larry Wheels, like, killing half of the people he spots. But it's just that when it's CrossFit, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, it's because it's more spectacular looking.
It's not even that as well. It's because CrossFit is essentially the new kid at school. It came into the world, and it was so different than anything that's ever been out there before. All the big sports, like who the fuck's this little fucker coming in here doing all its butterfly pull-ups and all this sort of mad stuff. So they just sort of picked in it, thought, well, how can we discredit this training modality and injuries? Yeah,
and the thing is, like with CrossFit competitions, notice I'm saying competitions here. You are going full send, so form is going to break down. You tend to when you increase training stress to that amount, increase for fatigue and injury, etc. does go hand in hand with each other.
It's risk versus reward in a competition setting, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
you're trying to win something. You know what I mean?
But it's very similar to Olympic weightlifting, the injury rates per 1,000 hours, which doesn't surprise me at all, because at the end of the day, that's what the movements are.
Yeah, sure. We've got another one here, Tom, though. So this is another one we spoke about. This was actually a bigger one that we spoke about in the previous episode, and this was a paper from 2018. And this looked at 3,049 participants, obviously more subjects there. And this looked at people who engaged in CrossFit between 2013 and 2017. Once again, this was a questionnaire-based paper, so level of evidence isn't like super high or anything, but that's normally how they do these anyway. And overall, our
2018 one, sorry.
Yeah, 2018, yeah. So overall, our findings suggest that the rate of injuries for less engaged participants was 0.74 injuries per 1,000 hours compared to 0.27 injuries per 1,000 hours for those more engaged. Now, I think we're going to touch on this more when we sort of summarise the papers, but really important to note there that the injury rate was higher for those who are less engaged with CrossFit and those who are basically more engaged. And what that basically means is people who do CrossFit more regularly. So somebody who's maybe doing it once a week, and maybe someone who's doing it 5 times a week.
Because you give yourself time to adapt.
Yes, exactly. And that's going to be a running theme, especially with these new papers. So we are now going to fast forward to 2021, brand new papers. And we do have quite a bit more data to go off. So the quality is still, again, fairly limited. I mean, it's not, we say it's a new paper, but it's not that, like, it's only been a few years apart, really. So there's not like super loads and more papers there. But what these papers do, once again, is highlight some key points, right? So the first one up here then. Nice buzzwords here. A systematic review and meta-analysis from September 2021 found an injury rate, and this is the important bit, of 3.2 per 1,000 hours. And this was similar to another 2021 paper, a systematic review of epidemiology and risk factors, and that was from 2021 as well. So they found very similar injury rates, which are also similar to the one we looked at way back in 2013, which was around 3 per 1,000
that
hours.
is, as far as we're aware, the most recent evidence of injury in CrossFit. And once again, very similar to most other weightlifting.
Yeah, so it's not outrageous compared to anything else. And it's being consistent as well.
If it still sounds scary to you, like, let's just round up here, like three injuries per 1,000 hours of training. I mean, can you remember when we did like the episode on running injuries?
Oh, fuck me, that was like 20 something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to pull numbers out my arse, but we was talking like 19 injuries,
per 1,000 hours,
per 1,000 hours. But you don't hear, well, I don't want to say you don't hear anyone, because you do hear people doing it, but you don't hear as many people demonising running.
It's more accepted way of training. That's why more people run.
More accepted way.
And that's what it is, isn't it? There is a couple of key takeaways though from this data I want to highlight. So as we said there, it's very similar to other sort of strength sports. And the most affected areas, which is also similar to things like weightlifting, is shoulder, spine, and knee. And that makes complete sense if you think about CrossFit. They're the areas you're going to potentially be loading too much. Too soon.
But once again, like, you could say that about most weight-based
exactly. Most strength training
modalities. Yeah.
Spine,
I mean, when you're
knees.
doing instead of talking about specific exercises, let's say specific movements that we tend to do in weight-based training. So if we do something as simple as like an overhead press, or we're doing a bench press, what are we doing? We're fucking doing a push-up. You're basically loading the shoulder girdle straight away. If you're squatting something, or if you're deadlifting something, if you're lunging something, or if you're just jumping up and down, what are you loading? You're loading your hips, you're loading your knees. So once again, that's no big surprise. And the spine, listen, as soon as you get load on your back, it's the spine that's stabilising. So it's not just CrossFit. You could say this about fucking literally anything that means you're weightlifting. So you could say it's about powerlifting. You could say about bodybuilding, although bodybuilding has a lot of single joint exercises. So yeah, I mean, bodybuilding is quite common for, in general, like tendon tears, etc.
Yeah, makes sense.
On the bicep. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, it's nothing new.
And I just want to talk about some discrepancies as well, because when we actually look at these papers closely, you can see there's a lot of variance in that. They've obviously had to come to some sort of average for the per 1,000 hours, but there's a lot of variance. And the thing that keeps kind of time and time again when you look at these papers is experience. So I'll read a little extract here. Discrepancies could be explained by varying CrossFit experience. For example, they looked at a couple of papers here. The study with a lower rate excluded participants with less than 6 month experience, and the study with a higher rate of injuries followed CrossFit beginners. So I'll say it again. The study, which had a lower rate of injuries, excluded participants with less than 6 months experience, and the study with a higher rate followed CrossFit beginners. And that is like, just makes complete sense. Like, people don't think about this. Is when you're new to something, which is something we'll talk about anyway, but when you're new to something, obviously, if you're not doing it properly, there is going to be an increase. Not properly as in the way you're doing it, but if you're not doing loading correctly, then you're obviously going to increase that risk of injury in the early days.
This is where it gets really complicated, because obviously it comes down to a lot of factors. Now, if you're kind of doing CrossFit by yourself and you know how to auto-regulate properly, have we done an episode on auto-regulation? Am I imagining that?
We've mentioned it.
We mentioned it, but we haven't.
No, we did. We did an episode. Remember at the start of 2021, we did our sort of 3 tips for getting into fucking resistance training. Yeah, we spoke about that.
Auto-regulation is, I don't want to fucking overcomplicate this episode, but I mean, auto-regulating is just, you intuitively know when to go full send or when to scale it back a little bit. You know, you're taking all different factors like your sleep, etc., how the RPE feels at the time, and you just know when to kind of scale it back a little bit. So if you're training CrossFit by yourself and you utilise auto-regulation, awesome. But if, let's say, you're brand new to CrossFit and you go to a box and you've got that kind of coach who just wants to push you full send, then it wouldn't surprise me that new people tend to get injured more in that regard. Obviously, we're not even just taking into account that they've just not been doing it long enough to adapt. But if they're, fresh to CrossFit and you have got like someone that's really all for programming or just coaching in general and they're pushing you full send, that could play part of it. But to be honest with you, you could find out with any other personal trainer for any other sport or any other method of weightlifting. If I straight away had someone doing RPE 10 deadlifts for sets of fucking 3 and they've never touched a weight before, then chances are that I'm probably doing more damage than good, because I've not given that time to adapt at the appropriate dose of training stress.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally speaking, you made some good points there about how if you're telling someone to go full send, as we keep saying, it's going to cause, like in the classes I do, for example, Ashley, who we mentioned, who left a comment earlier, and she does go to the classes I coach at. She's been doing it for about a year now, over that, and she's pretty good at it. So she is someone I can go to, and I can have a joke and say, go full send, and I can actually get her to push it, and there's not any worries there. But then there's some other people in the classes. For example, I've got an elderly lady called Glynis who does CrossFit, absolutely smashes it, but she's not been doing it that long. And I'm not going to tell her to go full send on thrusters when she's just doing basic movements to allow her to live a better quality life in her older age. Do you know what I mean? And that's where I think we are going to come on to coaching and stuff like that anyway. But
I mean, when you're dealing with like load-based training, then you need to be trained at the appropriate dose. The Goldilocks effect, I call it. Too cold, too hot, just right.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you've got a coach that's constantly fucking going full send, then it's detrimental. Unless you've adapted to it, that you can have these high stress sessions. That's a different story. But it is a bit upsetting when you see a coach pushing full send.
We'll go on to that in a sec, actually, because you made a good point. I want to go on to that. We'll go through the points in a chronological order, just so it makes more sense. So as you can aware, we're going to talk about more our own thoughts now. That's the data anyway. Those papers that I mentioned, they will be in the show notes. You want to have a look if you're interested. But basically what it highlights is injury rates are pretty much the same as other stuff. So CrossFit, no, it is not inherently dangerous, and it is not more dangerous than other resistance training based activities. Okay, so calm down, relax. CrossFit's not going to kill you. Okay.